The World Cup is less than 2 months away, and the US men's national team roster announcement is even closer. So today, using hints, past rosters, interviews from Gregg Berhalter, we are going to try to predict the 26-man roster that's going to be called up November 9th. Hi, if you're new here, I'm Filippo, and welcome to Tactical Manager TV, and welcome to the last roster prediction video before the 2022 World Cup. And I apologize in advance for the poor lighting today. I mean, there's been a hurricane here in Orlando, in Florida in general, and there's been some power outages, so I'm doing my best. Before we start, make sure to hit that like button. If this video hits 1,000 likes, Harry Maguire will start versus the US men's national team, and that drastically increases our odds of at least getting a goal or two. Okay, thank you for hitting the like button, which is a great way to sponsor this video for free. Let's play the intro, and let's get it started. Before we get to the players, I do need to give you some important assumptions and informations that you need to keep in mind before we get to, trying to essentially guess the US men's national team roster. And after I give you all this information, make sure to comment down below which will be the 26-man roster from Gregg Berhalter, or who do you think will make it? Okay, but let's go to these important info that you will need. First and foremost, it is a 26-man roster, as that is the size that you're allowed to bring to the World Cup. And based on Gregg Berhalter's many roster compositions, it will likely be 3 goalkeepers, 5 fullbacks, 4 center backs, depending on Reggie Cannon going or not, 6 midfielders, 5 wingers, and 3 center forwards. Now that you have the composition of the roster, let's go to the other important information that you need. Gregg Berhalter is still figuring out the following roster spots based on recent comments and roster decisions, which means he does have 75 to 80% of this roster set, but it seems like he's still trying to figure out the 3rd goalkeeper, the 4th center back, the backup left back, the 6th midfielder, and the 3rd center forward. But based on the data we have, we will try to predict who those players are in this video. Also, obviously assume that all the players I'm going to say here are going to be healthy during the World Cup. Some of them could get injured, some of them might not recover from any injury they have now. Along with that, I'm also going to assume there will be no newcomers. So if there's a player that has never been in a Gregg Berhalter roster or never got one single minute under Gregg Berhalter's time with the US men's national team, I'm going to assume they will not be in this World Cup roster no matter what they do in the month of October. There will also be an MLS camp in the month of October for players that play in Major League Soccer that their teams did not make the playoffs or got knocked out of the playoffs. So I don't know how that can impact the roster. I'm going to assume it won't impact the roster at all. And the US men's national team roster for the World Cup will be announced November 9th. So mark your calendars. With all that said, let's start the actual predictions, and we'll start right away with the goalkeeper. Okay, as I said prior in the video, there will be 3 goalkeepers in this roster. So who are they? So to me, if healthy, Matt Turner and Zach Steffen are locks in Gregg Berhalter's mind. There's no doubt in my mind, at least, that for this World Cup, we have to go with Matt Turner, but don't be surprised if Gregg Berhalter starts Zach Steffen, as that looks like he is his preferred choice. So who would be the 3rd goalkeeper? And it's tough to figure it out. The data points towards Sean Johnson from New York City FC or Ethan Horvath from Luton Town in the EFL Championship. But there is a tiny little chance that Gabriel Sonina, that belongs to Chelsea and is loaned out to the Chicago Fire in Major League Soccer, could be there as well. Out of all the roster decisions possible, the 3rd goalkeeper is the least important of them all. I think Berhalter will bring Sean Johnson. So just to recap the names I think he's going to bring, it's going to be Matt Turner from Arsenal, Zach Steffen from Middlesbrough, and Sean Johnson from New York City FC in Major League Soccer. Next up are the fullbacks, and we already know, based on what I said, that I expect him to bring 5 fullbacks, because one of the 5 can play as a center back, and he has played on that hybrid back 3 that Gregg Berhalter loves so much. So who are the 5 fullbacks that I believe Gregg will bring into this camp? Not this camp, to the World Cup. So right away, if healthy, Serginho Dest and A-Rob, Dest from AC Milan and A-Rob from Fulham, are starters. So there's no need to explain much there. They will be in the roster as long as they're healthy. Reggie Cannon is another one that I think will make it. He's one of Gregg's favorites and key for Gregg Berhalter's hybrid back 3. When he wants to move out of his 4-3-3 system and change to that back 3, Reggie Cannon is usually his right central center back. And, whether that works or not, that's a different discussion. I am not a big fan of it, but Reggie Cannon will likely be in Qatar. Now, I also think DeAndre Yedlin has been a name that is likely to be there, right? He's been around with Gregg Berhalter a lot. Out of 14 World Cup qualifying matches, Yedlin started or came off the bench in 9 of them. He was also in our June roster and in the September roster as well, and even started against Saudi Arabia. I would be very surprised if Yedlin does not make the World Cup roster. Now, I do think also Joe Scally will make it, but I could be wrong there because Gregg Berhalter could go with an actual backup left back option, such as Sam Vines, for example. But he has shown that he has no issues on bringing an excessive amount of right backs and just one left back in a full roster. Dest is likely his backup left back, in my opinion, and Scally could play there as well if needed. Scally was also in the last 2 camps in June and September, and he honestly looked bad in June, but looked very good against Saudi Arabia, which is the most recent data point that we have. Plus, he's been having a very strong Bundesliga season, so that has some weight to it as well. So I think Joe Scally will make the roster. So just to recap, the fullbacks I believe Gregg Berhalter will bring into this World Cup will be Serginho Dest from AC Milan, A-Rob from Fulham, Reggie Cannon from Boavista, Joe Scally from Borussia Mönchengladbach, and DeAndre Yedlin from Inter Miami. Next up are the center backs, and I believe he's going to bring 4 center backs. So who are Gregg's 4 central defenders? Okay, so center backs, honestly, the top 3 for Gregg Berhalter, at least, if healthy, are no doubt in my mind Walker Zimmerman, Aaron Long, and Chris Richards. Okay, I'll be very surprised if any of these 3 are left out. Zimmerman is a locked-in starter for Gregg Berhalter, probably his #1 center back right now. Aaron Long has started every single game ever since the US men's national team has qualified to the World Cup. All 7 games. Oh my God, my brother in Christ, how's that even possible? Now, Chris Richards has mostly not been available due to injury, but when healthy, Gregg does bring him in almost every time, and there's a high probability that Gregg Berhalter sees Chris Richards as the other center back option to play next to Walker Zimmerman instead of Aaron Long. A very high chance. But who will be the 4th center back? So look, I think only center backs that were originally called into the September camp or added on are in contention, which are Cameron Carter-Vickers, that was cut out of camp due to an injury, Mark McKenzie, and Eric Palmer-Brown. So yes, I don't think Tim Ream, John Brooks, Matt Miazga, or James Sands will make it to Berhalter's roster, and honestly, you watching this video probably have the same opinion as me. You know, Highline doesn't fit the system, the same excuses as always. I don't think Brooks, Ream, Miazga, Sands, any of them will fit it. Well, any of them will make the roster. Whether they fit or not, that's a different discussion for this video. They won't be there. So Cameron Carter-Vickers getting injured right before the September camp definitely didn't help his odds of making the World Cup roster. However, I still think he will make it because Mark McKenzie played on both games and honestly failed to impress me. And I think he also failed to impress Gregg. And Palmer-Brown got no minutes at all. And we already have heard that Gregg doesn't really rate Palmer-Brown. So I think Cameron Carter-Vickers will be that 4th center back. But you never know with Gregg Berhalter. But just to recap, the 4 center backs that I think he will bring into this camp if they are healthy to the World Cup will be Walker Zimmerman from Nashville, Chris Richards from Crystal Palace if he can stay healthy, Aaron Long from the New York Red Bulls, and Cameron Carter-Vickers from Celtic in Scotland. Next up are the midfielders, and I believe Gregg Berhalter will bring 6 midfielders. With that said, let's go through them. So I believe there are 4 locks for Gregg right here. That is Tyler Adams from Leeds United, Weston McKennie from Juventus, Yunus Musa from Valencia, and Kelna Costa from LAFC. However, as I said, he will bring 6 midfielders because 1 or 2 wingers can also play in the midfield, which I'll talk about that later. But with that said, out of these 6 midfielders, 4 are locks, so there's 2 more spots available. So based on Gregg's roster selections and hints, interviews, I believe the names fighting for those 2 spots are Luca De La Torre, Christian Roldan, Malik Tillman, Johnny Cardoso, and Eric Williamson. Out of all those names, I think Luca De La Torre and Roldan are Gregg's front runners. I do think Roldan only didn't make the September roster due to injury. Roldan will also be with Gregg probably the entire month of October in Camp Cupcake, the MLS players, right? Because again, the Sounders are likely out of the playoffs by the time you're watching this. When I'm recording this, they're not yet, but they're likely out of the playoffs, which means Roldan, that is already recovered from injury, will probably be with Gregg the entire month of October, and we all know how much Gregg loves Christian Roldan. Now, if Roldan does not make it, I can see Tillman being the front runner right there to replace him. The German-American committed to the US men's national team back in the June camp of this year, and then he was also called in the September camp and came off the bench in both games. As long as he keeps getting minutes for Rangers in Scotland and in the Champions League, he definitely has a shot. Now, Johnny Cardoso and Eric Williamson are probably the last 2 options here, you know, so if you know, Roldan, De La Torre, and Tillman are out, then I could see Johnny and Williamson possibly making it. And the old school Berhalter boys are done. We probably won't see Lletget, Jackson Yo. I can't see that happening. Berhalter boys almost sounds like a boy band, like the better or worse version of the Backstreet Boys. So just to recap, these are the 6 midfielders I believe Gregg Berhalter will bring to the World Cup, and that is Tyler Adams from Leeds United, Weston McKennie from Juventus, Yunus Musa from Valencia, Kellyn Acosta from LAFC, Luca De La Torre from Celta de Vigo, and Christian Roldan from the Sounders. Only Roldan is the one that I'm not so sure of. I could see Malik Tillman making it there. I think it's between those two, but right now I think Roldan has a higher chance or higher probability of being there. Now off to the wingers, and I think honestly this is probably the easiest one to predict of them all. I feel like only injuries could lead to it being any different from this prediction. You see, Pulisic, Brenden Aaronson, Reyna, and Weah are all locks if healthy. Then, since I think Gregg Berhalter will bring 5 wingers, you have Morris or Areola fighting for the last spot, which I believe Gregg Berhalter prefers Areola. That's what I think based on what we've been seeing in many different camps. So Morris could still be ahead of Areola with Gregg. I don't know, but I'm going to go in this video and say that Areola will be there unless he is injured. Let's also hope Giovanni Reyna is healthy. If Giovanni Reyna is injured, because he is currently injured with a muscle strain and he will be out for 7 to 10 days, which when you hear 7 to 10 days with Reyna, we've seen 7 to 10 days become months before. So I do think Giovanni Reyna's World Cup is at risk due to injury. But let's hope Gio Reyna is healthy and assume he will be in the roster. So what I want to say is the 5 wingers that I believe Gregg Berhalter is going to bring are Christian Pulisic from Chelsea, Brenden Aaronson from Leeds United, Tim Weah from Lille, Giovanni Reyna from Borussia Dortmund, and Paul Areola from FC Dallas. In the previous section, I talked about how some wingers can play in the midfield. Gregg has hinted and said that Giovanni Reyna and Brenden Aaronson are options in the midfield. And we've even seen Gregg Berhalter put Brenden Aaronson as a central midfielder back in June. Reyna has yet to play as an 8 or a 10. He has only played on the wing under Gregg Berhalter. But yeah, fingers crossed. Let's hope Giovanni Reyna is fully fit. I am actually getting more worried as time goes on with the constant muscle injuries that he's been getting. And as many might remember, Claudio Reyna himself was injury prone. So that makes me even more worried about Giovanni Reyna's situation. Last but not least, the center forwards. And this is probably one of the toughest ones to predict in this video. So let's go by parts. Okay. Before Gregg announced the September roster, he said that he had 6 center forwards that were fighting for 3 spots in the World Cup. So right away we know there's only going to be 3 center forwards in the World Cup roster, and there's 6 players that could possibly make it. But there's probably even less right now if we go by parts and we eliminate a few. So the 6 that he mentioned were Jesus Ferreira from FC Dallas, Josh Sargent from Norwich, Brendan Vasquez from FC Cincinnati, Pifak from Union Berlin, Ricardo Pepi from Groningen, and Haji Wright from Antalyaspor. So no Jassi Zardes. He wasn't mentioned by Gregg Berhalter. That ship has sailed. But honestly, so has the ship of Haji Wright and Brendan Vasquez. Haji got called out by Gregg Berhalter back in June and was not called in for the September camp. Now Vasquez has never made it to any Berhalter camp. So honestly, I don't think Gregg Berhalter would bring him on to the World Cup without ever being in one camp. The best that can happen for Vasquez is he could be in Camp Cupcake in October, but that's still not the most competitive camp, so I can't see him making the roster. So we have 4 center forwards left right here with 3 spots available. The 4 that are left that I haven't eliminated yet are Jesus, Pifak, Sargent, and Pepi. Okay, so out of those 4 names, the first one to talk about is Jesus from FC Dallas. To me, he's a lock for Gregg, right? He didn't go into the first 2 World Cup qualifying camps, but since then, he's been to every single camp for the U.S. Men's National Team. All of them. Friendlies, the 3 World Cup qualifying ones, the Nations League one, all of them. And he started most games for Gregg Berhalter too, or at least many different games. So to me, Jesus is a lock for Gregg. So that cuts off 1 of the 3 spots. So now we have 2 spots available for 3 players, which is Pepi, Sargent, and Pifak, which is actually very tough to figure out. Pifak was not in the September camp, but Pepi and Sargent were there and failed to impress versus Japan and Saudi Arabia. Well, so did Jesus, to be quite honest, but that does not matter when you're a Gregg favorite. I'm going to assume Sargent will continue to score in England, Pepi will be just fine in the Netherlands, scoring a couple goals here and there in October, and Pifak might cool off a little bit in the Bundesliga, but he'll still be just fine and be scoring goals in October. So this might just be wishful thinking, but I do believe that Gregg Berhalter will bring Pifak. And alongside Pifak, I think he's going to bring in Ricardo Pepi. Yes, I do think he's going to leave Josh Sargent home. Honestly, if it were me, I would put Josh Sargent, Pifak, Pepe, and Jesus, and I would remove Paul Riola because, you know, Sargent can play on the wing and do a better job than Paul Riola there. And honestly, even Jesus can play in the wing if you really get to a point where you need to. You don't need to, but even Jesus can do a fine job there, better than Paul Riola probably. But that's not the point of this video. We're trying to predict Gregg's roster here, so my opinion doesn't matter. And I think Josh Sargent will not make it to the World Cup roster. So just to recap, I think Gregg will bring Jesus from FC Dallas, Pifak from Union Berlin, and Pepe from Groningen. Alright everyone, that does it for this video. The last World Cup roster prediction video until the 2022 World Cup, which is crazy. We're almost there. Around 50 days away by the time this video is out. Get excited, get pumped. Thank you BetOnline for sponsoring this video. Thank you for hitting that like button. And if you didn't hit the like button, please do it now and comment down below. Do you agree with me? Do you think these are the 26 players that Berhalter, or Gregg Berhalter, our coach, will bring to the World Cup in Qatar? I want to thank you very much for watching and expect a lot of USMNT coverage in the month of October. And during the World Cup, a lot of USMNT, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, and much more. Thank you very much for watching and have a great day.